Hi, this is Ann Brady, and I'm going to discuss more about my book and what's in it, and also why I wrote the book. The main reason I wrote this book was, to me, it was to help people. Uh, it is geared mostly towards adoptees to basically let them know that there are others out there like them. I may not have the same experiences as them, but I understand the reasonings for why they search, or, understand how they could feel different from others and separated. It's hard to relate to sometimes to people that don't have the same experiences, but also to let people know that who aren't adopted or haven't been involved in the social services part of adoption, or children being abandoned and put up for adoption, maybe never adopted, to let them understand how we feel and how we look at things, maybe a little bit differently than other people do, and to help them understand and not be so critical or so determined to tell us whether we should search or not search. I find it weird that a lot of times someone who will tell you you should search or you shouldn't search, they don't always understand, but they almost demand you do this. They're the same people, if you told them you're going to search, they would tell you, oh, don't search. You you may get rejected, or you're betraying your adoptive family and you're ungrateful. If you told them you weren't going to search, the same person might go ahead and say, well, why don't you search? What are you afraid of? So it's a double edged sword. You can advise someone and say, have you thought about searching? And this is not necessarily, you may not know the downside, but say, this is what you might find. You know, just think about it. But don't demand that they search or they not search. And to tell someone they're ungrateful to their adoptive parents because they're searching for their birth parents, you know, I don't think that's fair, because you don't understand why they're searching. Are they searching for a connection, or do they want to know why they were given up? Was the birth mother a child of 16 or 17 and the parents made her give the child up, or she was because she wasn't ready, and or they're upset about the fact that she got pregnant in the first place because of the shame it brought. You don't know the circumstances, and you don't know why they're searching. They could be searching to see if there are any for family medical history. Uh, Also, it's their decision. Let them weigh the pros and cons. Like I said, you can suggest it either way, but to demand or tell them they should, that may turn them to not wanting to do it because you're telling them to do it. And how dare you? You don't know me. You may see that as unreasonable. I don't. I do know, while my husband uh, helped me search, in some ways he supported me, in other ways he did actually tell me that he thought I was being ungrateful. But I had to explain to him, and then he understood that I felt like my search for my birth parents had nothing to do with my adoptive parents, my adoptive family. And I love my adoptive family, my parents, my brothers, and my cousins and aunts and uncles. But I felt like I needed answers. You know, I had no idea that I had my mother was an older woman who was single and never married, and that I had a brother. What I thought I was searching for was information that might tell me who she was or why I was given up. Uh, but I was under the understanding that she and my father had died in a car accident. I didn't know, you know, but by the time I searched and decided to search, I put it off for a long time because I felt, even though my parents knew I might eventually search and had told me that they were fine with it, that it still might hurt their feelings if I did it while they were still alive. And I finally decided that at 36, I couldn't wait anymore. I just thought it was imperative. Maybe I could find out some medical history. Maybe I could find out, information about my parents and so forth. And I did find out that when I finally found out who my birth father was, that either my birth mother knowingly lied to the social workers, because she did tell them not to look for my birth father, or my birth father lied to her and gave her a false name and a false narrative of his life. And the only thing he told her was that he was born in Providence, Rhode Island. And either possibility is possible, and I have no idea. And there's no way to find out, because when I started my search in 1990, I eventually found out through someone sending me a clip that my mother had died of a heart attack in 1980. And so I was 10 years too late to even be able to contact her. But it is what it is. And I did find my uncle, he gave me some, excuse me, insight into my birth mother. Eventually, I joined Ancestry.com and built a family tree. I built two, actually. One, my adoptive family tree, and my birth family's tree. I've had to modify it several times because I found I was looking for a John Houlihan born between 1924 and 1926, supposedly in Rhode Island. I could find no such person. And then I couldn't find such a person in Massachusetts. And I did search through John Houlihan's and found that none of them were applicable. Uh, some of them were kind, some of them were quite nasty, but that's life. And eventually, I went ahead. My youngest son, had already done the DNA testing. He did the maternal DNA testing, mitochondrial DNA testing, and later he did regular uh, testing for his ethnicities. And so eventually, when I got up the money, I spent the money to do a DNA test and submitted it. And it took a while, but eventually, what was weird was after my brother Bob came to live with me, I got a notice on Ancestry that from a message from a person who said she was looking for a Robert Pierce, and all the information she gave me, date of birth, his middle initial, where he was born, and so forth, matched my brother. And I knew I had to talk to my brother before I told her anything, but I told her I would be interested in helping her search. And that maybe seem, like lying to her, but I wasn't. But I couldn't tell her that my brother was most likely, from her information, my birth brother without his permission. I was in a quandary there because I did want to help her. And I talked to my brother about it, and Bob told me he didn't have a child. And she had told me who her birth mother was. Now, he had told me before he met Edwina in Sacramento, California, that he had been married and he didn't want to talk about it. He said it was too hurtful and too painful for him to discuss. Well, I discussed it with him, and he said, "But I don't have a daughter." And he said, "Did she say who her birth mother, who her mother's name is?" And I told him who it was, and he finally told me the story. He had been married to this woman. He had met her in the hospital, and he he went to work. He got a job, and they got married. He got a job. He went to work every day, and he said one day he came home. It was, I guess, weeks or months that he had come home, and she wasn't there when she had always been there. And so he went looking for her and found her living with someone else. And she said, "I'm with him now." And so he filed for divorce and left. And it turns out that, and made his way doing odd jobs and stuff, according to him, until he got to California. And then eventually he met Edwina and they got married. But he didn't know at the time that she was pregnant. And so, I'm guessing that she didn't either when he left. But anyway, I discussed it with him and I told him her name. And one time he asked me, because he was starting, as he was getting older, he was already somewhat paranoid at times anyway, and didn't like people getting close to him because he was used to people leaving him and abandoning him. Uh, so he was, he said, "Well, why did she come looking for me?" I said, "She didn't come looking for you. What she did was she contacted me because through my DNA, it showed we were related. She wasn't sure if we were cousins, first or second cousins or half cousins, but she knew we were related through the DNA. And so she thought maybe I could help finding you, but I wanted to talk with you first to see what you wanted to do. I would hope that you would contact her." Now, he did eventually decide to contact her, and I had an email address through Ancestry to message her, and I tried to reach her with this message that he wrote up, and I had an email address, but it came back returned. I had no other way to contact her. Now, I did message message her and heard nothing else. And so after he died, I contacted her again because there's no way through the messaging that I could send his message to her. And by then I had forgotten all about it. And so I told her about my brother and more information, and said, "This is your father, and he has died, but you know, I had tried to get him to contact you, but," and I had to argue with her to explain to her that I was telling her the truth because she didn't want to believe me. Eventually, we became friends on Facebook, and she accepted the fact. And eventually, we met, and we brought her over to our house. And so, eventually, because she said she was telling us stuff like her mother used to tell her that, and she said her mother did tend to lie. She was moved from her home and put up for adoption, not by the mother, but because she was abusive to her. And she told her when she finally met her later in life, and she said that the reason that she ended up being put up for adoption was because that my brother, her father, hated her because she was a girl and was mean to her and stuff. And that the reason he left was because she was a girl and he didn't like girls or women. And I said, that's not true. And eventually he said, look, I'm going to show you a picture. You know, would you like to see a picture of your birth father? And so I showed her a picture of me with him when we were in Sacramento, California. We had a picture taken of the two of us. And so he's a lot taller than me. And he said, that's him? I said, yes, that's your birth father. That's Bob Pierce. He said, that's not who I thought it was, because she said, I only knew this short guy. You know, I said, no, this is him. And we explained to him that he loved kids, especially girls, and, would banter with them and, protect them against other people if he thought they were trying to hurt them. There was a case when we were at a friend's house, and this guy was upset because Bob spoke up and protected this kid from him because he was mean to the kid, and the kid was going to get some food, and he bumped the kid or cut in front of him and made some nasty remark to the kid. And Bob told the kid, just ignore him. He's full hot air anyway, or something to that effect. And and this guy resented that. In fact, he tried to get into a fight with my brother, with the two of them being drunk. It was like ridiculous. But he tried to pick up a rake to fight when my brother was going to fight him, just hand to hand. And the other guest told him, put the rake down. You're going to fight him hand to hand, and you're not going to attack him with a rake, because this man tended to fight dirty. He got his butt kicked. My brother didn't really try to hurt him. He did mostly defensive. But it was like watching if you've ever seen two drunks fight, it was, now I'm not saying my brother was an alcoholic. I'm just saying they had gotten drunk that night, but neither one of them could really fight. If you ever watched the old black and white Keystone Cops, that's what it looked like. Or Charlie Chaplin fighting, the bad guy, where they're constantly with their fists up and aiming at each other and missing. But anyway, my brother was defending himself more than fighting, and because he didn't want to hurt the guy, and the guy ended up getting, being beat, and so he never tried it again. I'll tell you that. But my brother, he could be a pain and an annoyance, but I loved him, and he was a great guy. He'd give his shirt off his back to anybody. But the other thing is, eventually, like I said, we met, and we've had a relation. We've met several times with her and with my niece. And then years after that, I got a match to someone that it said we were first cousins or closer. And so when I looked at it, it showed that we could possibly be aunt and niece. And so I contacted her because I was trying to find out who, with her being related, who my birth father was. Maybe I could find out. And she said, well, it couldn't be my father. And I was like, no, it wouldn't. If you're my niece, it wouldn't be your father. She had a family tree, but I wasn't sure exactly what I was looking at. And so I went to a adoption searching site, which I belong to, and it's a private thing. So I asked for the help of if there were any search angels that could look at my family tree and her family tree, because at that time I had a paid membership, and see how exactly we're related and if somewhere in there in her family tree was my birth father. And so I went ahead and I got contacted, private message person, and she was on Ancestry.com. So I gave her access to not to change, but to look at our stuff, both our family trees. And so she went in there and looked. He said, "Well, this is your sister. She's your niece. This is her mother, and this is who your father is." And I found that my father's name was Charles Joseph Dowd. And so then I found out who my sister was, and I messaged my niece and I told her, your mother is my sister, and her father is my father. We're half sisters. So she contacted her mother, and her mother joined Ancestry.com and had the DNA and did the DNA test. Now, she never did a tree, but she did the DNA test. It came out 100% that we were half sisters. So I knew who my birth father was. And so it was great knowing. Unfortunately, he had died in 2017, which was before I found out who he was. But it was nice to know who it was. And then I found out not only did I have a sister, but I had two sisters and a brother. And I wasn't able to contact the other two, but I'm friends on Facebook with my sister and my niece. And while we don't always talk, I wish them happy birthdays. And, sometimes I see posts from them and I'll like and share it. And, it's nice to know that I have family out there. Uh, and to me, it's great because it's expanding my family. It's not replacing my adoptive family, and it's adding to my family. It's making my family larger, and love spreads and grows. And that's the way I feel about it. And if this can help people understand adoptees better and how we feel and how we look at things, maybe a little bit differently than they do, and if it can help adoptees feeling, yeah, I can relate to this because I work and I do this. I do remember when I talked to my mother-in-law about it at one time that I'd seen articles that were talking about most of the people that were in prison were adoptees. And I was like, that just sounds weird because how would they know? Did they interview all of them and say, I tend to not trust some of these studies or surveys because it depends on how large a sample. Where did they do the research or sampling from? I mean, there was once a survey where they said that girls only go to college and they usually don't, they're looking for a husband and then they quit college. And it's like they surveyed 250 people from one college. That's not a study, and that's a very small sample because there are thousands of women that go to college all over this country. You would need to expand your database for your research before you uh, publish it as God's truth. So I tend to look at these studies with a grain of salt. And that's all for today. And I hope everybody has a great day and enjoys their life. And peace out.